delicacy of his form and constitution gave way to the excessive labor, and he one morning refused the orders of his master or driver to rise from the straw on which he was stretched, declaring they might kill him if he chose, for he would not even try to carry another load of stones. Repeated messages had been sent from the Venetian consuls, where his mother and sister were sheltered, to the Aga to return him, and when the Algerines found that they had absolutely reduced him so near death, they thought it best to spare his life for the sake of future ransom. They agreed, therefore, to let him return to the Christians. His life was for some time despaired of, but through the kind attention he received, he was rescued from the threatened dissolution. His recovery was concealed for fear of his being demanded back to work, and a few months after, the Spanish peace of 1784 being concluded, a ransom was accepted by the Algerines for the suffering family, and they were set at liberty. These pirates in old times extended their depredations into the Atlantic as far as the British Channel. They swarmed in the Mediterranean, not only belonging to Algiers, but Tunis and other ports on the coast of Barbary. Their corsairs making descents on the coasts of those countries which border on the Mediterranean, pillaging the villages and carrying off the inhabitants into slavery. The corsairs were vessels of different descriptions, some large armed ships and latterly frigates, others were row galleys and the various craft used by the nations which navigate that sea, and had been taken by them and added to their marine. Upon the slaves being landed at Algiers, they were marched to the Dey's or Bashal's palace, when he selected the number which according to law belonged to him, and the rest were sold in the slave market to the highest bidder. A moiety of the plunder, cargoes and vessels taken also belonged to the Dey. Occasionally a person pretending to renounce his religion and turning Mahometan would have his sufferings mitigated. The most desperate attempts were sometimes made to effect an escape from these ruthless monsters, which occasionally succeeded. In 1644, William Oakley and 4 companions escaped from Algiers in a most miraculous manner in a canvas boat. There was at this time an English clergyman, Mr. Spratt, in captivity, and the wretched slaves had the privilege of meeting in a cellar where he would pray with them. Oakley had got into the good graces of his master, and was allowed his time by giving his master $2 a month. He traded in tobacco and a few trifling articles, so that a strict watch was not kept on his movements. He conceived the project of making a canvas boat. He says, "I now first opened my design to my comrades, informing them that I had contrived the model of a boat, which, being formed in pieces and afterwards put together, might be the means of our deliverance." They greedily grasped at the prospect, but cooler reflection pointed out difficulties innumerable. Some of them started objections which they thought insuperable, and these I endeavored to overrule. We began our work in the cellar, which had served for our devotions, though it was not the sanctity of the place, but its privacy, that induced us to this selection. We first provided a piece of wood 12 feet long, and that it might escape observation, it was cut in two, being jointed in the middle. Next we procured the timbers of ribs, which, to avoid the same hazard, were in 3 pieces each, and jointed in 2 places. The flat side of one of the 2 pieces was laid over the other, and 2 holes bored in every joint to receive nails, so that when united, each joint would make an obtuse angle, and approach towards a semicircular figure, as we required. We had in the formation of an external covering, to avoid hammering and nailing, which would have made such a noise in the cellar as to attract the notice of the Algerines, who were insufferably suspicious about their wives and slaves. Therefore we provided as much canvas as would cover the boat twice over, and as much pitch, tar, and tallow as would make it a kind of tarpaulin, as also earthen pots in which to melt our materials. The 2 carpenters and myself were appointed to this service in the cellar. We stopped up all chinks and crevices, that the fumes of these substances might not betray us. But we had not been long at work when the smell of the melting materials overcame me, and obligated me to go into the streets, gasping for breath, where, meeting with the cool air, I swooned away, and broke my face in the fall. My companions, finding me in this plight, carried me back extremely sick and unserviceable. Before long, I heard one of them complain of sickness, and thus he could proceed no further. Therefore I saw if we abandoned our project this night, it might not be resumed, which made me resolve to set the cellar door wide open, while I stood sentinel to give notice of approaching danger. In this way we finished the whole, and then carried it to my shop, which was about a furlong distant. Everything was fitted in the cellar, the timbers to the keel, the canvas to the timbers, and the seats to the hull, and then all were taken to pieces again. It was a matter of difficulty, however, to get the pieces conveyed out of the city, but William Adams carried the keel, and hid it at the bottom of a hedge. The rest was carried away with similar precautions. As I was carrying a piece of canvas which we had bought for a sail, I looked back and discovered the same spy who had formerly given us much trouble, following behind. This gave me no small concern, but, observing an Englishman washing clothes by the seaside, I desired his help in washing the canvas. Just as we were engaged with it, the spy came up and stood on a rock exactly over our heads to watch us. Therefore, to delude him, I took the canvas and spread it before his face on the top of the rock to dry. He stayed his own time, and then marched off. Still, I was jealous of his intentions, which induced me to carry the canvas, when dry, straight back to the city, an incident that greatly discouraged my comrades. We also procured a small quantity of provisions and 2 goatskins full of fresh water. In the meantime, I paid my patron my wonted visits, kept up a fair correspondence, and duly gave him his demands, while I secretly turned all my goods to ready money as fast as I could, and putting it into a trunk with a false bottom, I committed it to the charge of Mr. Spratt, who faithfully preserved it for me. The place which we chose for joining the boat together was a hill about a half-mile from the city, thinking by that means the better to descry the approach of danger. When the pieces were united and the canvas drawn on, 4 of our number carried the boat down to the sea, where, stripping ourselves naked and putting our clothes within, we carried it as far as we could wade, lest it might be injured by the stones or rocks near the shore. But we soon discovered that our calculations of lading were erroneous, for no sooner had we embarked than the water came in over the sides, and she was like to sink, so that some new device became necessary. At last, one whose heart most failed him was willing to be excluded, and wished rather to hazard the uncertain torments of land than the certainty of being drowned at sea. However, the boat was still so deeply laden that we all concluded that it was impossible to venture to sea. At length another went ashore, and she held her head stoutly, and seemed sufficiently capable of our voyage. Taking a solemn farewell of our 2 companions left behind, and wishing them as much happiness as could be hoped for in slavery, and they to us as long a life as could be expected by men going to their graves, we launched out on the 30th of June, 1644, a night ever to be remembered. Our company consisted of John Anthony, William Adams, John Jeffs, John the carpenter, and myself. We now put to sea, without helm, tackle, or compass. 4 of us continually labored at the oars. The employment of the 5th was bailing out the water that leaked through the canvas. We struggled hard the first night to get out of the reach of our old masters, but when the day broke we were still within sight of their ships in the haven and roadstead. Yet, our boat being small, and lying close and snug upon the sea, either was not discovered at all, or else seemed something that was not worth taking up. On all occasions we found our want of foresight, for now the bread which had lain soaking in the salt water was quite spoiled, and the tanned skins imparted a nauseous quality to the fresh water. So long as bread was bread, we made no complaints. With careful economy it lasted 3 days, but then pale famine, which is the most horrible shape in which death can be painted, began to stare us in the face. The expedients on which we fell to assuage our thirst rather inflamed it, and several things added to our distress. For some time the wind was right against us. Our labor was incessant, for although much rowing did not carry us forward, still cessation of it drove us back, and the season was raging hot, which rendered our toil insupportable. One small alleviation we had in the man whose province it was to bail the water out of the boat. He threw it on our bodies to cool them. However, what with the scorching of the sun and the cooling of the water, our skin was blistered all over. By day we were stark naked, by night we had on shirts or loose coats, for we had left our clothing ashore on purpose to lighten the boat. One of our number had a pocket dial which supplied the place of a compass, and, to say the truth, was not ill befitting such a vessel and such mariners. By its aid we steered our course by day, while the stars served as a guide by night, and, if they were obscured, we guessed our way by the motion of the clouds. In this woeful plight we continued 4 days and nights. On the 5th day we were at the brink of despair, and abandoned all hopes of safety. Thence we ceased our labor, and laid aside our oars, for either we had no strength left to use them, or were reluctant to waste the little we had to no purpose. Still we kept emptying the boat, loth to drown, loth to die, yet knowing no means to avoid death. They that act least commonly wish the most, and, when we had forsaken useful labor, we resorted to fruitless wishes, that we might be taken up by some ship, if it were but a ship, no matter of what country. While we lay hulling up and down, our hopes at so low an ebb, we discovered a tortoise not far from us asleep in the sea. Had the great Drake discovered the Spanish plate fleet, he could not have been more rejoiced. Once again we bethought ourselves of our oars, and silently rowing to our prey, took it into the boat in great triumph. Having cut off its head, and let it bleed in the vessel, we drank the blood, ate the liver, and sucked the flesh. Our strength and spirits were woefully refreshed, and our work was vigorously renewed. Leaving our fears behind us, we began to gather hope, and, about noon, discovered, or thought we discovered, land. It is impossible to describe our joy and triumph on this occasion. It was new life to us. It brought fresh blood into our veins, and fresh vigor into our pale cheeks. We looked like persons raised from the dead. After further exertion, becoming more confident, we were at last fully satisfied that it was land. Now, like distracted persons, we all leapt into the sea, and, being good swimmers, cooled our parched bodies, never considering that we might become a ready prey to the sharks. But we presently returned to our boat, and from being wearied with the exertion, and somewhat cooled by the sea, lay down to sleep with as much security as if it had been in our beds.